The space station floated against the star-streaked void, a hub of commerce and criminal enterprise where anonymity was both a currency and a curse. Beneath the artificial lights of its crowded corridors, the shadow moved unseen, a wraith in dark clothing that absorbed the ambient glow and rendered him indistinct. His gait was unhurried, his expression a mask of practiced calm. To most, he was just another shadow among many. To those who knew better, he was the deadliest man in the galaxy. The rendezvous point was a dingy cantina wedged between a brothel and a black market cybernetics shop. Inside, the stench of stale ale mingled with the acidic bite of plasma exhaust. The shadow scanned the room, his eyes settling on a lone figure cloaked in gray, a hood drawn low to obscure his face. The shadow approached, sliding into the booth across from the man without a word. The man spoke first, his voice a rasp that echoed with static. "You are the one they call the Shadow." The shadow said nothing, his silence a confirmation. "Good," the man said, leaning forward, the hood slipping back just enough to reveal a silver implant running from temple to jaw. "I have a job for you. A kill." "Everyone has a kill," the shadow replied, his tone flat, unimpressed. "Not like this one," the man countered, sliding a hollow chip across the table. The shadow caught it between two fingers, activating it with a flick of his thumb. The image that appeared was a young man's face, aristocratic and smug, with cruel eyes that spoke of power inherited, not earned. "Corthus Alaric," the man said. "Heir to the throne of the Warlords. The one who will inherit the combined fleets and armies of the most ruthless bastards in the galaxy." The shadow's expression remained impassive, but inside, he felt a cold knot of unease tighten. Even for him, this was an audacious target. "The Warlords believe themselves untouchable," the man continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "They laugh at the idea that anyone would dare strike at them. They believe their heir is invincible. I want to prove them wrong." The shadow deactivated the hollow chip and set it on the table, pushing it back. "You want me to start a war?" The man's mouth twisted into a grim smile. "War is already coming. You're just the opening salvo." The shadow leaned back, crossing his arms. "What's the price?" "Enough to disappear," the man said. "Enough to buy a new life on a world where no one knows your name. Enough to leave all of this behind." For a long moment, the shadow said nothing. His eyes drifted to the cantina's entrance, where a pair of warlord enforcers swaggered in, their heavy boots striking the floor in a rhythmic thud. The patrons quieted, eyes averted. The enforcers glanced around, sneering, secure in their dominance. The shadow returned his gaze to the man in gray. "How do I get close?" "Corthus is hosting a celebration on the capital planet. A gathering of the warlords and their most trusted allies. It will be a grand display of arrogance. And their greatest vulnerability." "A fortress," the shadow said. "A gilded cage," the man corrected. "The palace is impregnable from the outside. But from within, even a single shadow can snuff out a flame." The shadow said nothing further, rising and turning to leave. The man's voice stopped him. "One last thing." The shadow paused. "Corthus is surrounded by guards at all times. But there is one moment, just one, when he is alone." "When?" "When he performs the ritual of blood," the man said. "A rite to affirm his claim as the heir. It is a sacred ceremony. No one is permitted to witness it." The shadow nodded once, his expression unreadable. Without another word, he walked away, his silhouette melting into the crowd. The smuggler's ship was a rusted hulk, its corridors cramped and reeking of stale air. The shadow kept to himself, his face hidden beneath a deep hood. Around him, mercenaries and thieves huddled together, exchanging whispers of distant wars and upcoming heists. No one spoke to him. No one dared. In the dimness of the cargo hold, the shadow accessed the data he had acquired. The capital planet loomed on the display, a sprawling metropolis encased in layers of defense grids and shield domes. The palace sat at its center, a towering monolith of black steel and gold, its spires reaching toward the stars like grasping claws. Corthus Alaric's face appeared again, and the shadow studied it closely. The heir was young, barely in his 20s, but his eyes held a cruel cunning that belied his age. Son of Warlord Alaric, the most feared and bloodthirsty ruler in the galaxy. To kill Korthus was to strike at the very heart of the Warlord's dominion. The shadow leaned back against the cold steel wall, closing his eyes. Images flashed through his mind, past kills, past targets, faces blurred by time but never forgotten. He had always been a weapon, a blade wielded by unseen hands. But this job was different. This job would not merely take a life, it would change the course of empires. The smuggler's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're approaching the capital planet. All passengers prepare for docking." The shadow rose, his hand sliding beneath his cloak to check the concealed blade strapped to his sides. The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere, flames licking at the portholes. The assassin moved through the narrow corridors like a specter, unseen and unnoticed, a predator slipping through the cracks. When the ship touched down, the shadow was the first to disembark. He stepped onto the landing pad, the gleaming spires of the palace rising against the blood-red sky. Security drones hovered above, scanning the crowd with mechanical eyes. Guards in black armor patrolled the perimeter, weapons at the ready. The shadow kept his head low, slipping into the throng of disembarking travelers. He had forged documents, a new identity as a minor official from a distant star system. Just another face in the crowd, just another shadow in the sea of bodies. Inside the palace, the opulence was overwhelming. Gold filigree adorned every wall, and vast banners bearing the Warlord's insignia hung from vaulted ceilings. The air was heavy with incense, a cloying scent that masked the underlying odor of sweat and fear. The shadow moved through the crowd, eyes scanning every detail, every exit, every guard post. The celebration was in full swing. Warlords in lavish robes laughed and drank, their sycophants fawning over them with exaggerated deference. The heir was not yet present, but whispers circulated of his impending arrival. The shadow slipped into a shadowed alcove, pressing himself against the wall. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the grand hall, the raised dais where Korthus Alaric would soon take his place. The heir would be surrounded by his father's most loyal guards, each one a seasoned killer. But there would be a moment, a single, perfect moment, when he would be alone. A servant hurried past, eyes downcast, carrying a tray of gleaming goblets. The shadow seized his wrist, spinning him around. The servant's eyes widened, and the shadow pressed a blade to his throat, a gentle but unmistakable pressure. "Where does the heir go to perform the ritual of blood?" The servant swallowed, sweat beading on his brow. "The sanctum," he whispered. "It's through the eastern corridor. No one is allowed inside." The shadow released him, the servant stumbling away without a backward glance. The assassin remained in the alcove, his expression impassive. The plan was taking shape in his mind, a series of calculated moves, each one leading inexorably toward that single moment of vulnerability. Soon, the heir would take his place in the sanctum. Soon, he would stand alone before the altar, his father's bloodied blade in hand, performing the rite that would confirm his dominion over the galaxy. And when that moment came, the shadow would be there. A shadow, waiting to strike. The palace corridor stretched endlessly before the shadow, its polished obsidian floors reflecting the crimson glow of overhead sconces. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, each breath laced with a metallic tang that hinted at the blood soon to be spilled. The shadow moved silently, his form a whisper against the walls as he navigated the maze of corridors. Every step brought him closer to the sanctum, the place where Korthus Alaric would perform the ritual of blood. Voices echoed down the corridor, and the shadow pressed himself against the wall, slipping behind a marble column. Two guards strode past, their black armor gleaming, rifles slung across their backs. Their voices were tense, their eyes sharp. "Did you hear?" one muttered. "Someone's been asking about the sanctum." "One of the servants. Probably some fool hoping to catch a glimpse of the heir," the other said, sneering. "They'd be lucky to leave with their eyes intact." Their footsteps faded into the distance. The shadow exhaled slowly, his muscles unclenching. The sanctum was closer now, just beyond a set of towering doors inlaid with golden runes that pulsed faintly, their meaning lost to all but the most devoted of the Warlord's priests. The heir's sanctum was a place of blood and tradition, where centuries of rulers had slit their palms to consecrate their birthright. The shadow scanned the corridor, noting the placement of security cameras and the subtle bulges in the walls that concealed plasma turrets. He counted silently, eyes darting to each point of vulnerability. The layout was a deadly puzzle, but he had studied it well. A servant approached, eyes downcast, arms laden with ceremonial robes. The shadow stepped forward, his hand shooting out to seize the man by the collar. The servant gasped, a tray of silver rings clattering to the floor. "Quiet," the shadow whispered, his voice soft yet sharp as a blade. "Do you want to live?" The servant nodded frantically, sweat streaming down his brow. "You're going inside the sanctum," the shadow said. "You'll take me with you." "They'll kill me if they find out," the servant stammered, eyes wide. "They'll kill you if you refuse," the shadow said, sliding a slender blade from his sleeve and pressing it gently to the man's neck. "Choose." The servant swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against the knife. "Follow me," he whispered. They moved swiftly down the corridor, the servant walking with hurried, nervous steps, the shadow trailing a half-step behind, his face shadowed beneath the hood. As they approached the sanctum doors, 2 guards stepped forward, their rifles crossed to block the entrance. "What's your business?" one of the guards barked, eyes narrowed. The servant forced a shaky smile. "The Heir ordered these robes for the ritual. I was told to bring them directly to the sanctum." The guard's eyes flicked to the shadow. "And who's this?" "Acolyte," the shadow said, bowing his head. "Sent by the high priest to assist in the preparations." The guards exchanged glances, and for a moment the shadow felt his muscles coil, ready to strike. But then the guard grunted, stepping aside. "Be quick," he said. "The Heir doesn't like to be kept waiting." The shadow followed the servant through the towering doors, the heavy slabs closing behind them with a deep, resonant boom. Inside, the air was colder, the scent of incense cloying and thick. The sanctum stretched before them, a cavernous chamber of black stone, its walls etched with ancient runes that pulsed like a beating heart. At the center of the room stood the altar, a slab of dark marble streaked with dried blood. On it lay a ceremonial blade, its edge gleaming beneath the cold light of a single, flickering torch. Corthis Alaric stood before the altar, his back to the door, his arms raised as he murmured the sacred words of the ritual. The Heir's robes were a deep crimson, embroidered with gold sigils that glowed faintly in the dim light. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw clenched, his posture rigid. Around him, the shadows loomed, their forms stretching and bending as if straining toward him. The servant faltered, eyes darting to the shadow, terror etched across his face. The shadow pressed a hand to the small of the servant's back, a silent command to keep moving. They stepped closer to the altar, the servant's trembling hands presenting the robes. Corthis lowered his arms, turning slowly. His eyes locked onto the servant first, then slid to the shadow. For a moment, they lingered on the hood, suspicion flickering in his gaze. "You," Corthis said, voice smooth but edged with steel. "Step forward." The servant's knees buckled, and he collapsed, robes falling to the ground in a heap of crimson silk. The shadow stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a face shrouded in shadow. Corthis's eyes narrowed. "You're not one of my acolytes." "No," the shadow said, his voice calm. "I'm your executioner." Corthis's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing. He lunged for the blade on the altar, but the shadow was faster. In a single fluid motion, he stepped forward, his hand snapping out to seize Corthis by the wrist. The Heir snarled, swinging a fist, but the shadow caught it, twisting hard. Corthis grunted in pain, his knees buckling. "You think you can kill me?" Corthis hissed, eyes blazing. "My father will." The shadow drove a knee into Corthis's gut, doubling him over. In one swift motion, he seized the ceremonial blade from the altar, its cold weight heavy in his hand. He pressed the blade to Corthis's throat, the Heir's pulse fluttering against the edge. "Your father's reign ends with you," the shadow said, his voice soft, almost gentle. Corthis's lips parted, a last, desperate plea forming, but he never got the chance to speak. The blade flashed, slicing cleanly across his throat. Blood spurted in a crimson arc, splattering the altar and staining the pristine robes. Korthus gurgled, eyes wide, fingers clawing at his neck as he crumpled to the floor. The sanctum fell silent, the only sound the faint dripping of blood pooling around the altar's base. The shadow wiped the blade on Korthus's robes, his expression as calm as a man finishing a chore. Behind him, the servant whimpered, his face pale and eyes fixed on the dead heir. The shadow turned, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Leave," he said. "Tell them nothing." The servant scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward the door. The shadow watched him go, waiting until the heavy doors sealed shut. Alone now, he crouched beside Korthus's body, his gloved fingers searching the heir's pockets. A data chip. The shadow slipped it free, sliding it into his own belt. Whatever secrets the heir had kept, they now belonged to him. He rose, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. Blood soaked the floor, the scent mingling with the incense to form a sickly sweet haze. The blade lay discarded, its purpose fulfilled, its shine dulled by dark crimson. Footsteps echoed outside the door. Voices shouted. The shadow moved swiftly, crossing the room to a hidden alcove he had noted earlier, a narrow ventilation shaft just wide enough to accommodate a man of his size. He slipped inside, the shaft closing behind him just as the doors burst open. Guards stormed the sanctum, weapons drawn, eyes wild as they took in the scene. Korthus Alaric lay dead on the cold stone floor, his blood spreading like a dark, growing shadow. The heir was dead, and the galaxy would soon know that even the mighty warlords were not untouchable. From the shadows of the shaft, the shadow watched as chaos erupted below. Alarms blared. Guards shouted orders. The palace trembled under the weight of the news that would soon spread like wildfire. The impossible kill was complete. Now, all that remained was to escape the fortress and disappear before the warlords unleashed their wrath. The shadow exhaled, his breath steady, his pulse calm. The game was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The palace trembled with the force of shouted commands and the heavy tread of armored boots. Sirens blared, their shrill wail echoing through the vast corridors as guards stormed through every passage, weapons drawn, eyes frantic. The news had spread faster than wildfire. Korthus Alaric was dead. The heir to the warlord's empire had been assassinated within the very sanctum where his ascension was to be consecrated. In the grand hall, the warlords gathered beneath a vaulted ceiling that glistened like a night sky littered with dying stars. Warlord Alaric stood at the center, his broad shoulders stiff, fists clenched at his sides. His face was a mask of fury, eyes dark as twin black holes. Beside him, his remaining sons and daughters stood in silence, their expressions as unreadable as stone idols. A holographic display projected the crime scene for all to witness. The blood-soaked altar, the lifeless body of Korthus sprawled across the cold stone, his eyes glassy and vacant, his throat a ragged, gaping wound. The image flickered and spun, replaying the scene as if the sight might somehow provide answers to a question that had no rational explanation. "Who dares?" Alaric's voice was a thunderclap, each syllable striking the gathered warlords like a hammer. "Who dares to spill the blood of my blood within my own palace?" No one spoke. Warlord Garan, a hulking brute with a face like cracked granite, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the other warlords. They all wore the same expression, a mix of shock, fury, and for some, barely concealed delight. "The sanctum was sealed," Warlord Halessa said, her silver eyes narrowed to slits. "No one is allowed inside during the ritual of blood. Except—" Her gaze slid to Alaric, and for a moment, the air thickened, heavy with unspoken accusations. Alaric's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding audibly. "Are you suggesting," he said, voice dropping to a dangerous rasp, "that I had my own son killed?" Halessa held his gaze, unflinching. "I suggest nothing. I only state the facts. No one but the heir and his servants were permitted within the sanctum." "A servant?" Garan muttered, eyes narrowing. "They found one near the altar, babbling about a shadow." "A shadow?" Alaric barked. "What shadow?" "A man," Garan said, his brow furrowed. "The servant claimed a man forced him inside. A man with no name, no face. A ghost." Alaric's eyes blazed, and he slammed his fist against the armrest of his throne, the impact sending a reverberating crack through the hall. Find him. I don't care if you have to raise every slum and sanctuary from here to the outer systems. Find him, and bring me his head. The warlords nodded, their expressions grim. The meeting dispersed, their cloaks trailing behind them like shadows. Alaric remained seated, his chest heaving, eyes fixed on the hologram of his son's corpse. Beneath the grief and rage, something colder and darker festered, a suspicion that gnawed at his mind like a rat in the walls. The shadow moved swiftly through the underbelly of the capital city, weaving through alleys slick with rain and the stench of rotting refuse. Above, search drones hummed like mechanical wasps, scanning every corner with beams of blue light. Wanted posters bearing a shadowy, indistinct figure flickered across holoscreens, the words dead or alive, 10 million credits emblazoned beneath. The entire planet was on high alert. Bounty hunters, mercenaries, and warlord spies scoured every sector, interrogating anyone who dared to linger in the streets without purpose. But the shadow was no common fugitive. He knew how to disappear, how to blend into the background until he became nothing more than another fragment of the city's grime and noise. In a crowded bazaar, the shadow slipped into a ragged tent, its entrance obscured by frayed crimson cloth. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and the drone of whispered incantations. A woman sat cross-legged on a threadbare mat, her eyes closed, hands resting on her knees. Her face was lined with age, her hair a mass of silver coils. As the shadow entered, her eyes snapped open, irises a milky white. "You're being hunted," she said, voice thin and papery. The shadow crouched before her, pulling a data chip from within his sleeve. "I need a way off this planet. And I need you to decode this." The woman's bony fingers took the chip, her eyes never leaving his face. "You killed a prince," she said, voice carrying a note of curiosity. "What did he do to deserve it?" "He existed," the shadow said, tone flat. The woman snorted, her laugh like dry leaves rustling. "You think you're the first to strike at the warlords? You're just a gnat that bit a wolf. Can you decode it?" The woman inserted the chip into a device that whirred and blinked. Data streamed across the screen in a rapid flow of encrypted symbols. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Interesting," she murmured. "What is it?" She hesitated, her fingers dancing over the controls. "This isn't a simple ledger or communication log. This is a list of names. Names. Warlords. Allies. Traitors," she said, glancing up. "It's a network of connections, those loyal to Korthus, and those who plotted against him." The shadow's jaw tightened. "Who gave the order?" The woman shook her head. "The chip doesn't say. But it was given to the heir by someone high up. Someone who wanted him to know who his enemies were." Before the shadow could respond, the tent's entrance tore open. A figure loomed in the doorway, blaster raised, face half hidden beneath a dark hood. The shadow rolled to the side as the blaster fired, a bolt of plasma sizzling past his ear. He sprang to his feet, spinning around to kick the assailant's weapon hand. The blaster clattered to the ground, and the shadow seized the attacker by the throat, slamming him against the wall. The hood fell back, revealing a gaunt, hollow-eyed man with a scar running from cheek to chin. "Alaric sends his regards," the man hissed, blood trickling from his split lip. Before the shadow could respond, the man's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Smoke curled from his mouth, the acrid scent of cyanide filling the tent. The old woman cursed, scrambling back. "They're closing in," she whispered. "They'll burn the city to ash to find you." The shadow released the corpse, his mind racing. The list of names. The hidden connections. Someone had orchestrated Korthus's death from within the warlord's ranks. Someone with the power to plant a mole, to manipulate Alaric's paranoia, to weaponize the chaos. The shadow turned to the old woman, his expression grim. "Get me off this planet," he said. "I need to find the one who set me up." The woman nodded, hands shaking as she shoved a bundle of coordinates into his grasp. "There's a ship waiting in the lower docks. But be warned, they're not the only ones hunting you." The shadow slipped the chip back into his sleeve, his heart a steady, pounding rhythm. The game had changed. He was no longer just a weapon. He was now a target, a scapegoat for a conspiracy that reached deeper than he could have imagined. As he stepped into the rain-soaked streets, his mind burned with a single searing thought. Someone had used him to kill Corthus Alaric. Someone who stood to gain from the chaos. And if he was to survive, he would have to find them before they found him. The hunt had begun. The freighter sliced through the cold expanse of space, its hull cloaked in electromagnetic dampeners to avoid detection. Inside the dim cargo hold, the Shadow sat cross-legged, his back pressed against a crate marked medical supplies, his eyes fixed on the data chip he held between two fingers. The list of names had burned itself into his memory. Warlords, ministers, and commanders who had either pledged allegiance to Corthus Alaric or quietly conspired against him. But one name stood out, a name the Shadow had not expected. Warlord Halessa. The woman who had stood so calmly amidst the chaos in the palace, her silver eyes betraying nothing but cold calculation. It was her name that appeared most frequently in the communications Corthus had kept hidden. It was Halessa who had warned the heir of a rising faction of dissenters within Alaric's own circle. It was Halessa who had provided the intelligence that Corthus was using to root out traitors. And it was Halessa who had most to gain from the heir's death. The Shadow clenched his jaw, fingers tightening around the data chip. Halessa had not merely orchestrated the assassination, she had played him, using him as the perfect weapon to sever the bloodline and destabilize Alaric's power base. And now, with Corthus dead, Alaric's allies would turn against each other, weakening their coalition and leaving Halessa free to seize control. A light blinked on the control panel, and the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "We're approaching the rendezvous point. You sure about this, Shadow? If they find you." "They won't," the Shadow said, slipping the data chip into his belt. "Prepare for extraction." The pilot muttered a curse but complied, the ship banking sharply toward a remote asteroid base hidden within the ring of a dying planet. The Shadow rose, adjusting the hood that concealed his face. His eyes hardened. He was done being a weapon. Now, he would become the knife in the dark, a blade aimed directly at the heart of Warlord Halessa. The asteroid base loomed like a jagged fortress of steel and stone, its spires bristling with gun turrets and communication arrays. The Shadow slipped through a maintenance shaft, his movements swift and fluid, his breath steady and controlled. Every corridor was patrolled by Halessa's elite guards, men and women in sleek black armor, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They moved in precise, mechanical formations, weapons held at the ready. But the Shadow was a ghost, slipping past them like mist, his feet making no sound against the metal floors. Every step brought him closer to the command center, a heavily fortified chamber where Halessa monitored the chaos unfolding on Alaric's homeworld. The Shadow pressed against a wall, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. A guard stood at the entrance to the command center, his stance rigid, blaster held tight against his chest. The Shadow moved like a shadow, sliding behind the guard and striking with brutal precision, a swift, soundless strike to the base of the neck. The guard crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. The Shadow caught the guard's wrist, pressing a scanner against the man's palm. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a cavernous room dominated by a central control station. Screens flickered with live feeds from across the galaxy, battleships firing plasma cannons, soldiers rioting in the streets, civilians fleeing as cities burned. And at the center of it all stood Warlord Halessa. She wore a high-collared black coat adorned with silver insignia, her silver eyes fixed on the screen before her. The room was empty save for her and a single attendant, a slender woman in a gray uniform, who hovered nervously at her side. "Pathetic," Halessa muttered, her eyes gleaming as a fleet of Alaric's ships descended upon a rebellious colony. "They tear themselves apart like rabid dogs, and all it took was one cut to the throat." The Shadow stepped forward, his presence a dark silhouette against the dimly lit room. "Your handiwork." Halessa's head snapped around, eyes narrowing as she took in the hooded figure standing before her. The attendant gasped, but Halessa raised a hand, silencing her. "The Shadow," Halessa said, her lips curving into a cold smile. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me." The Shadow said nothing, his gaze fixed on her, his fists clenched beneath the folds of his cloak. "You played me," he said, voice as calm and cold as a winter wind. You knew what I was, what I could do, and you used me to kill Korthus. Halessa stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Korthus was a butcher. Arrogant. Weak. He was a child who wielded power without understanding it. A danger to all of us. A danger to you, the shadow said. Halessa's eyes flashed. Alaric was grooming him to take over. Korthus would have united the Warlords and crushed every independent faction in the galaxy. I couldn't let that happen. So you had him killed, the shadow said. No, Halessa said, her smile widening. You had him killed. The shadow's jaw clenched. You set me up. I gave you a job, Halessa said, circling him like a predator. And you executed it perfectly. The galaxy thinks you're the assassin, a rogue mercenary who slipped through the cracks. Alaric has put a price on your head that would bankrupt a star system. The shadow's eyes narrowed. Why not just kill me here and now? Halessa stopped in front of him, her gaze softening, almost pitying. Because you're more useful to me alive. The shadow's fists tightened, but he forced himself to remain still. Useful. Halessa nodded. Alaric's power base is crumbling. His allies are turning on each other, fighting for scraps. But some remain loyal. I need you to finish what you started, eliminate them. Make it look like Alaric is purging his own men. When the dust settles, the galaxy will see him for what he is, a madman who killed his own son and then slaughtered his own generals. And you, the shadow said, voice taut. I'll be the one who steps in to restore order, Halessa said, eyes gleaming. I'll be the one who unites the galaxy under one banner, mine. The shadow said nothing, his mind racing. Halessa was more than a warlord. She was a master manipulator, a spider weaving a web that spanned the entire galaxy. And now, she wanted to make him her blade, a weapon to carve her path to power. Halessa stepped closer, so close he could feel the chill radiating from her. You have a choice, she said, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. Join me, and you will be untouchable. The galaxy will fear you, revere you. Refuse, and I'll hand you over to Alaric myself. I hear he's fond of slow executions. The shadow's eyes flicked to the screen behind her, where Alaric's ships continued to rain fire upon the rebel colony. Civilians screamed and fled as entire city blocks crumbled under the assault. The Warlords were tearing the galaxy apart, and Halessa wanted to use that chaos to seize control. For a moment, the shadow said nothing. His gaze locked onto Halessa's. Then he nodded, a single, slow dip of his chin. Fine, he said. But I want something in return. Halessa's smile widened. Name it. The list of names Korthus had, the shadow said. The ones who betrayed him. Halessa's eyes glinted. You'll have it. The shadow's expression remained impassive, his heart a steady, controlled beat. He knew she was lying. Knew she had no intention of letting him walk away when this was over. But for now, he needed to play along, to stay close, to learn what she knew. Because somewhere in that list of names was the one who had given the order to kill Korthus. And the shadow would not rest until he found them, and made them pay in blood. As Halessa turned away, the shadow's gaze dropped to the guard he had taken down at the entrance. The man's comlink blinked faintly, a coded transmission looping through the device. A transmission that was meant for Halessa's ears only. The shadow slipped the comlink into his sleeve, his expression hardening. The game was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun.